some of these developments are actually extending the state sovereignty into regions that it doesn't easily control, and it's a form of building bridges. And finally, the third implication here, I'm running out of time, is to look more carefully at the complex relations between the Sino-Burmese, perhaps the descendants of Chinese who came over in the 1800s, early 1900s, these latest Singiming that have come over, and also a group in Kokang region that are called the Kokang. And they're the only ethnic Chinese group that are recognized as one of the 135 nationalities in Myanmar, which is why a lot of new migrants claim that they are Kokang as well. But you have to be able to speak the dialect in some ways. And so there are all these different groups of Chinese, people of Chinese heritage who interact in different ways. And I think that is one of the very fruitful grounds for future research. So I'm just going to end here, and I'll be happy to take questions in the Q&A. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Andrew Ong. Thanks everyone for actually ending quite promptly, and we are almost on the dot in terms of time. So that's great. We have about 24 minutes now, I think, for discussion. I think it's interesting to put these three presentations together. Starting from, actually, I will put them on a spectrum, maybe starting from Singapore and then to Malaysia and then to Myanmar, right? Starting from Singapore, we actually have an immigration policy that allows people to migrate here and to naturalize themselves. Whereas for Malaysia, you have the MM2H policy, which allows for an extended stay, but not a permanent stay or a change of citizenship to Malaysian citizenship. And what Andrew presented will be more of a frontier region where people come in and out, and it's very porous, a very porous kind of migration. And that these three kinds of areas and associated policies has a kind of impact on the temporality of migration itself, whether migration is seen as or can be adopted as a permanent move or a semi-permanent move or a very temporal move in itself, right? So I think it's interesting to just put them together and see that the huge variations in what we call new Chinese migration out of China since 1978, or even more widely associated with China post 2000, when a lot of Chinese middle class are moving out. Now, I just want to pose a few questions to each of the speakers to just start the ball rolling. Now, to Prof. Wong, and I think they will be more or less connected in some way. Actually, I would want to ask if our speakers can sort of characterize the kinds of migrants coming to the countries that they are discussing. So like for Prof. Wong, you focusing on Malaysia, my second home. I'm wondering if you can sort of give us a sense of the pattern of the new Chinese migration to Malaysia, right? So the only thing we are very clear of is that these new Chinese migrants go to Malaysia and they buy property, right? So that shoots up the prices. And of course, a lot of these are like Chinese companies that go to Malaysia to develop the property and then they sell it, right, to the Chinese nationals. Now, so in terms of patterns, do you see these Chinese, new Chinese migrants as buying these properties more just for investments or settlement? When they are in Malaysia, do they just stick to their own new Chinese communities? Are the children all in international schools? In Malaysia, are they working in a salaried job, or do they start their own new business in order to continue to be able to prosper in Malaysia? So what is the kind of migratory pattern, and would you characterize them as middle class, right? And even middle class, there's like upper middle class and lower middle class, right? Would they be the ones that could remain in China and continue to prosper, or would they be squeezed out of because they don't have so much capital. They are being squeezed out of China, and they find Malaysia as a kind of new frontier that they could sort of make more money out of. Right. So I'm wondering, how we should characterize this kind of Chinese new migrants in Malaysia. For Dr. Teng Pi, I have a similar question also on how we should characterize them. There is a differentiation. I think some scholars have noted a differentiation for those who arrive in Singapore before, say, the 2000s and after the 2000s, right? So we know that the initial years of the open door policy, the Chinese coming out are still not so well off yet, right? But from the late 90s onwards into the 2000s, right, a lot of them, when they come to Singapore, they are wealthier than local Singaporeans, right? So that gives a different kind of background to them, and therefore there's been certain observations that those that come before the 2000s are more likely to be willing to integrate locally, whereas those that come after the 2000s are much more still tuned in to China itself and not so willing or not so well integrated. So in these terms, because you used to work at the you told me just now you used to work at the Sun Yat-sen Nanyang Memorial Museum, and you have to organize all these tours for new immigrants so that they understand Singapore's history, and that's part of their induction program to be integrated into Singapore. So do you get a sense that these migrants after the 2000s or even after the 2010s, are they getting integrated into Singapore? And because now you're also working with the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, and I think the clan associations quite well as well. Could you give us a sense of whether the clan associations are doing have a good role or strong role in this integration process? And even clan associations, there will be differentiation, right? So those that are more southern China based, I think it would be because we know the new Chinese migrants, a lot of them are outside of southern China, right? So let's say, for example, the Suzhou Huiguan, right, might have more of these new migrants joining them. And then in that case, how well are they integrated? Are they like maybe even taking over and revitalizing the clan associations, right? Andrew, your presentation is interesting. It's a frontier region. I'm also wondering, right? You did say that all three autonomous regions got different kinds of Chinese migrants going into them. They're quite heterogeneous, but for the particular area that you're working on, is it possible to sort of characterize them in terms of their background, right? The kind of entrepreneurship that they go into, I don't know whether it's right or not to characterize it as some kind of economic adventurism, right? You go in, you take the risk, and you might make a quick buck, or you might even lose certain things, right? Not just money, right? So and to take that kind of risk, right, implies certain backgrounds, right? That you're willing to step out of your comfort zone, because there's not much of a comfort zone to be in, and to sort of explore and take forays into these new areas where there are opportunities but high risk as well, right? So would there be a Chinese from certain parts of China or certain social class or certain kinds of background that sort of pre-inclines them towards this kind of frontier economic adventurism, right? So maybe we can just sort of consider these questions first, and then we will jump to the Q&A questions that our audience have raised. Maybe we can start with Prof. Wong.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hui. I guess when we look into the characteristics or types of Chinese that came to Malaysia, the kind of pattern that you are referring to, I think there is no. I think it is safe to say that they are mainly temporal, meaning to say there is no prospect or little prospect of being naturalized, and therefore they know very well that Malaysia is a place where it is difficult for them to gain citizenship, to settle down permanently, and therefore they came with this mindset that they are going to invest, they are going to settle up to a point, using perhaps Malaysia as a way to, as a place where they can actually move on to other places and so on. But we can see that there is a clear understanding that there is no prospect of getting citizenship. I think that's point number one. But then Malaysia continued to be attractive to these people because they found that Malaysia has a atmosphere which they found suitable for them to bring up children, and therefore you find that many of their children are coming to schools in Malaysia. Many of them bought properties in order to bring their children over for education. It's not just for tertiary education, because tertiary education, I think most of these students came out on their own. But then we also have now, with the sizable number of Malaysia, my second home participants, increasingly there is a trend of what we call in some places, Pei Tu Mama, those accompanying mothers who brought their children out to study in international schools, and some even enroll them in the local Chinese schools. The idea is that there will be less stress, less stressful studying in Malaysia, and the opportunity of moving on to better schools at tertiary level without having need to go through the dreaded pressurized Gaokao in China has become increasingly appealing to many of these Chinese. At least that is the impression we got when we interviewed some of these people. So the Pei Tu Mama phenomena is yet another type of pattern that we began to see. Whether or not these people seek employment, yes, many of them solve employment with Chinese companies, but then many also began to move out to start their own businesses. In fact, many of these migrants actually, or these new Chinese who came out, were businessmen, small businessmen, small and medium businessmen who are able to bring some capitals and started their own businesses here. So we began to see the more visible ones would be the restaurants. A lot of the Chinese restaurants, some invested in hotels and so on, bought over hotels and tour agencies and so on. So we began to see a trend of this pattern. But generally, I think these are the people who found Malaysia attractive. For them to at least settle down for a while before they make the next move. So I think that's all from me for the moment.
Okay, Dr. Tan?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Hui, for the question. Yeah, I think you are right. Over the last 4 decades, I think from 1980s up to 2000, then 2000 to 2020, there might be a slightly difference in terms of newcomers integration incline. Yeah. So I would say that you can see the governments, I think they is also aware of the ground sentiment when you look at the influx of the newcoming into Singapore. Okay. So I would say that the Clan Association as well as Singapore Chinese Chamber or other local business association, they do play a role to actually helping the new immigrant to fit into Singapore society. As Provio mentioned that, I think from yesterday's what he shared with us, 2000 onwards, I think in terms of the mobility, I think, yeah, many of them with their capital, be it economic or cultural capital, I think some of them actually treat Singapore as a springboard, to to more developed countries when the opportunities appears. So this is, I think, one of the criticism by local as well in terms of their loyalty to Singapore. Yeah. So for the immigrants induction program, yes, I would say that not only Clan Association, Singapore Chinese Chamber also try to set up one committee in 2009 and to organize a local tour for new immigrant, as well as to conduct English course for new immigrant for them to pick up English so they can easily integrating into Singapore.
English but not Singlish.
Maybe it's English first, Singlish later. Yeah. So I think that is a part of national identity, I think, intention behind that. I would say more interesting case will be, I think, in the afternoon, Professor Ho Yi Kai's case. You know, when you look at Singapore, yeah, even though the majority are Chinese, yet I think Singapore government as well as Singaporean, they also try to differentiate themselves from the Chinese the Chinese in mainland China. Yeah, in terms of the subjectivity. Yeah. So they would have this Singapore Chinese Cultural Center, as opposed to another one. So I think that would be an interesting case in the afternoon. Yeah. I'll end here first.
Okay, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for the question about characterizing the type of Chinese migrants. I think in this Wa region, for instance, where there's tin mining, one way to look at it would be class. So there are laborers coming over from Sichuan to work in the mines, also from Yunnan, where there used to be the disused or the depleted tin mines in Kechu. So they bring along the skills right across the border. But then there are also the petty investors like the one I spoke about who pool together 1 million renminbi with other investors, and they buy up a small shaft, right? And they hope to dig and strike it rich. These people don't always last long, or they might make it big. I met a woman who lost 100,000 Sing dollars just like that. And then there are the bigger Chinese bosses, right? Those who really have a lot of money and really know what they're doing and have bought off the right types of brokers, have bought off the types of leaders, have the right standing to deal with the leader of the armed group, a foreign affairs minister, someone in the Politburo, and so on. So I think there's a whole divide across the range, right? And people at all levels are coming across. What is interesting though, that it's largely men. There aren't a lot at the higher level. You have to run an entrepreneurial business in this. Well, here it's about being the 大男人, being the 老板, and having that type of frontier masculinity, if you like. So it tends to be a more male-dominated field, and of course at the lower levels it's about hard labor in the mines, right? So it tends to be predominantly male.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Okay, I'm going to throw in a question from the audience here. It's kind of like a question that usually will jump up in such forums and we can't avoid it. Now it's from one of our fellows, Din Long. He asked, how have anti-China sentiments shaped government thinking or actions in your countries? Have you seen any documented cases in which anti-China sentiments have caused a rethink or undoing of government policy, in which the government has leveraged anti-China sentiments to justify certain political agendas? Right. So here's the more like so many new Chinese migrants coming, right? So I guess together with this, you can also deal with the other question would be, I mean, the kind of reaction or backlash against too many Chinese migrants coming in. One, in terms of government policy, right? Is there retweaking as a result of this? And of course, this will be related to whether the locals have a kind of reaction against them, and in particular, local Chinese or so-called the Lao Yiming, right? The old Chinese migrants or the Chinese born and bred in these places, whether they have also some kind of sentiments against these new migrants. And I also want to just add to that question. another question that is related from Kaori Shinozaki for Prof. Danny. She's asking, what is the factor that has changed the relationship between Xing Yiming and local Chinese? In other words, why is it that Xing Yiming is no more dependent on local Chinese, and whether that is a result of gradual change or even before the BRI, or is it a drastic change that happened after BRI? Okay, so I think let's take this round of questions and see how it goes. Should we just let's start with Teng P this time.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the interesting question. I think in the case of Singapore, with the influx of new immigrants into Singapore, I would say that we are not only have to be mindful about local Chinese perception or how they feel about the number, and also because of the nature of Singapore as a multiracial society. Yeah, I think how do Malays and Indian communities see the trend that's over last 40 decades is another sensitive issue, I would say, and that scholar have to keep in mind. But of course, it is not today's topic. Yeah, and as of whether the government thinking and then whether change it, I think in the case of Singapore, I would say that in my opinion, new immigrant or immigration policy is a deliberate move by PAP government. Yeah, and in response to its reality in Singapore, be it low fertility and then civil groups, it's a constant and yet immediate crisis. Yeah. So in my opinion, I would say that you will continue to take this on, and that even though with the pressure coming from local Singaporeans, yeah. So the only thing is how do Singapore government as well as this client association and chamber, like the business community, work together and then to let them to fit into society. I think that is the upcoming challenging, in at least coming 10 or 20 years. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Let's move to Andrew first because Prof. Danny has got two questions to handle. So we have Andrew.
Yeah. So very quickly, I think the anti-China and anti-Chinese sentiments is quite a tricky one because there is sometimes backlash against Chinese SOEs for their investments and their projects that they run under the BRI. Then there's also backlash against the Chinese state, right, for supposedly interfering in the peace process, for interfering in political events in Myanmar. And then there's backlash against the different types of Chinese migrants and also the Chinese who have been around for a very long time. So I think that there is a sentiment here that is quite situational. In terms of large policies, the Myanmar government suspended the Midson Dam, a hydroelectric dam project in 2011, and that was big news at the time. Recently, it has also tendered out the construction of Yangon New City to companies beyond the Chinese company. So they're introducing some form of competition there. It's worried about national debt. But these are all policies, domestic and national policies. There is a lot of worry about Chinese taking up the room in Mandalay and Lashio. So I think these need to be passed out in very specific ways at the local levels with regards to this form of anti-Chinese sentiment. It takes on many different forms.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Andrew. Let's move finally to Prof. Danny Wong to address the questions.
I will, thank you, Dr. Hui. I will just respond first to the question by Dr. Shinozaki. Kaori Shinozaki. The question about the old migrants and the new Chinese that came in, whether or not they have their kind of relationship, whether the Chinese, how they were actually, whether this sort of non-dependency on the local Chinese has developed immediately or after a while and so on. Well, I think I alluded to that as in the form that at the beginning, I think many of these Chinese who came in were really in need of local Chinese help to show them around and so on. But then after certain years, you find that the new group of Chinese and also the new confidence that they have developed and also the network that they built over the years have sufficiently allowed them to actually work directly and went on directly to actually discuss or to penetrate into different spheres of businesses. But of course, the group that were in, what we call the group that were basically marginalized could be the smaller businessmen who were no longer sort of able to compete with these Chinese. But if you look into the bigger Chinese, local Chinese firms and so on, that established firms, I think they work very well together as well. So there are this group that may not depended on the old Chinese, but then there were also instances where you find them working together to get projects and to develop new initiatives. Coming back to your question on anti-Chinese sentiments and so on, I think in the case of Malaysia, this thing came very strongly during the period leading up to the 14 general elections. I think that was a time when we began to hear, the walls of Qingzhou, Guangdong Qingzhou Industrial Park was described as the Great Wall of China. Then there was this issue about backlash against the Chinese tourists, quite a few of this sentiment. But of course, the question whether or not these kind of backlashes actually brought about policy change in Malaysia, perhaps not policy change. I think the policy remained constant to continue to invite Chinese companies to come in to invest because of the opportunities that people see in them. But the more important part is that I think some of these actually forced the government to make some readjustment. I think the classical case would be the East Coast Rail Link, where the Malaysian government actually made a turnabout to went back to China to negotiate for a better deal, one that would be more equitable, perhaps, or more correct way of negotiation. So we begin to see that there is no basic policy change. I think we will still continue to welcome Chinese tourists, welcome Chinese investment. So there's always these opportunities that we look upon as important. But I think in terms of what we call policy, I think there was some relook into some of the arrangements, some of the deals, but not a major policy change.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Prof. Wong. Thanks a lot to all our speakers, Prof. Wong, Dr. Tan, and also Dr. Andrew Ong. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today, and I apologize that we can't answer all the questions. We try to pick out as many as possible to address them and group them together as well. But we can't, this being a webinar, we can't show our appreciation through clapping, but I'm sure that all of you appreciate our speakers for sharing with us based on their expertise today and also for answering all our questions. Thank you very much to the speakers and to everyone for joining us today. We will have to end this session now, and hope that the next session you will join us and also continue to participate in this conference. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.